Legislative Black Caucus. I'd like to introduce them in order of seniority. First, we have Representative Symphonia Thompson. Next, we have Representative Harold Dutton. Next, we have Representative Alma Allen. Next, we have Representative Ron Reynolds. Next, we have Representative Jarvis Johnson. And we have Representative Sean Theory. Welcome, everyone. All right, so let me just jump into it. There was a report from the Texas Justice Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that collects, analyzes, and publishes data about the Texas criminal justice system. And they found that over the past 15 years, the number of people who died in homicides by law enforcement before being put in jail on suspicion of committing a crime has crept up year over year. The Texas Attorney General reports that from January 1st of 2019 to December the 31st of 2019, there were 199 separate incidents statewide involving police officer shootings with a firearm that caused injury or death. Of those individuals who were either injured or killed in those incidents, 77 were white, 60 were Hispanic, 54 were black, 5 were Asian or Pacific Islander, and 2 were not available, and 1 was other. This equates to more than 27% of those incidents involving blacks and more than 30% involving Hispanics. 94% of the blacks were black males. To put this in more perspective, the population of Texas in 2019 was 41% white, 40% Hispanic, 12.8% black, 5% Asian, and 1% American Indian. This led the Texas Justice Institute to conclude that in Texas, black men are dying at rates disproportionate to their population. In light of these reports, representatives, and your personal knowledge, could you please share your initial reaction and feelings surrounding the death of George Floyd, a Texas native, a Houston native, as well as other questionable officer-involved interactions across the state of Texas resulting in death or serious bodily injury to blacks, such as Tatiana Jefferson, Tobias Mackey, Christian Taylor, and others? And what's the current state of policing in Texas? We'll start with the person with the most seniority. We'll start with you, Ms. Symphonia Thompson.
Oh, thank you so much. Good to see you, Jeffrey. Let me tell you, this is a problem that we have been grappling with for many, many years, and we've not been able to solve it, but not because we have just ignored it. Each session of the legislature, we have gone to the legislature and we have tried to move the ball forward in the effort to be able to do something to protect the rights and liberty of people of color within this state. And we have fallen short, not because we didn't try, but each time we have made progress. Let me just give you some examples. We've made progress when we had the Sandra Bland bill. Even though we didn't get everything that we wanted in that particular bill, but I was able to pass, add an amendment to another bill during that same session that required de-escalation of law enforcement, because we believe that that is one of the factors that we think that contribute to people being able to survive if there's de-escalation applied. One of the biggest problems that we have had is that we have not had enough people with like minds like us in the legislature to be able to move the ball forward. But it's just not only those people, it is more than those people. We have to have people with like minds in business, in religious organizations, in social organizations, and in all walks of life who sees what we're talking about and take a position that that would be the right thing to do. To treat people as though that they were citizens and give them the same rights and freedoms that we give everybody within this state and within this country. So we don't dodge the bullet and say, oh my goodness, it's just so bad, we have this problem, we can't do nothing about it. No, we go there, and whether we win or lose, we fight anyway, and we push and we try to enlarge the circle of support of individuals so that we be able to hopefully get this through. Now, I think it's going to be a little different next time, and this is why I think that. It is because of George Floyd and situations like that that has happened in the past and recently, and just happened recently in Georgia. People are now fed up, their eyes are beginning to open up, and they begin to understand why we've been fighting for the things we're fighting for, and why Black Lives Matter. It doesn't mean that we think that our lives are the only lives that matter. Black Lives Matter because we have not been a part of other lives that matter, and we want to be inclusive. So that's why we fight for those issues. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. Representative Dutt.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Let me just start this way. I agree with everything that Chairwoman Thompson said. I hope she's right, though. She's right in the sense that we in this caucus have been fighting this fight. This is the 48th anniversary of this caucus. And if you go back and you look at the history of this caucus, and you look at the bills that the members of this caucus have filed over and over and over sometime, what you'll see is that there's a
All right, we are live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third panel for our Texas Legislative Black Caucus series, our town hall series. We are so glad that you were able to join us tonight. We've got a great lineup of guests. Our host is the Harris County, Fort Bend County delegation for the caucus, and we're just excited to have you join us. You know, one thing that we can't get more excited about is audience participation. We have been loving all of the comments that you guys have been making, the questions, so continue to do that as we move forward. We really appreciate you. I just want to give you guys a little bit of laying the groundwork, give you some housekeeping rules. We have a panel. We have so many members from the Houston delegation that we can't even get them all on the screen at one time. So what you'll do is you'll hear some members over the phone, and then others will be on the screen. But they are here, and they are excited to hear from you. We also have a way for you to ask questions. You can type your question on Facebook Live feed or submit on the GoToWebinar under questions. And that's under the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you wish to ask a question, please try to let us know what city you're from.
All right, we are live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third panel for our Texas Legislative Black Caucus series, our town hall series. We are so glad.
Throughout our police departments all around the United States, including how qualified immunity has protected and prevented others from recourse. It prevents those victims from getting their day in court to rectify the violation of their civil rights. We can and we will take steps to both prevent police misconduct and allow victims to hold officers accountable. Ending qualified immunity achieves this goal, and I look forward to the passing of this landmark legislation. To the George Floyd family, I extend once again my deepest condolences and my support. And I, along with all of my colleagues, stand in full solidarity and support with you. You are our motivation, and you are in our prayers, and we are fighting for this all the way to the finish line. God bless you, and thank you.
all right. Thank you. Now we'll go to
Chairwoman Nicole Collier.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you for those wonderful words, Representative Theory. I echo them and I share in your sentiment and wishing the George Floyd family our sincerest condolences and our commitment to make change in Texas when it comes down to policing and criminal justice reform. And what you see today is the first of a series of legislation that's going to be rolled out by members of this caucus that's going to address policing and criminal justice reform. I'm so appreciative of the leadership of Chair Senfronia Thompson. She has never been one to shy away or back down from a challenge. And we are up to making sure, and we won't back down to ensure that there is a positive change in Texas when it comes down to policing. I had an opportunity to participate in a meeting with Chair Garnett Coleman. We did an interview, and at that time he mentioned that the statutory duties of police have not significantly changed since they were originally codified in 1965. That blew my mind. You mean to tell me so much has changed in our country, in our state, in our lives, but not policing the statutory duties of police officers? So that is something that this particular piece of legislation that Chair Thompson has brought forth is going to do. This is the purpose of this. So over time, things have changed, but policing has changed as well. So today, police should be granted the discretion to use alternatives to arrests where useful and required to provide life-saving measures or prevent other officers from harming people as needed. This George Floyd Act amends the duties of peace officers in this way. There will be a duty to intervene, a duty to identify, a duty to render aid, and then we're going to remove the mandatory thing to arrest on all crimes. There should not be a mandatory arrest for all crimes. Police will be clearly expected to identify themselves as peace officers before taking action unless such identification renders the action impractical. Police will have a duty to immediately render aid when a person is injured. And that includes whether that person's injuries relate to the involvement with the police officer. And then while it's a duty, it's currently a duty for police officers to arrest all offenses, including the most minor. Other statutes now recognize and authorize officers to give someone a citation and release them. And this is the thing, police should be able and authorized, but not required to arrest in many circumstances. An arrest should be based on probable cause. And what's most relevant to Mr. George Floyd's death, officers shall intervene if another officer may be violating Texas law or departmental policy, or if the actions of an officer put any person at risk of bodily injury, or to stop a use of force if force is no longer required to complete the apprehension of a suspect. What has commonly been referred to as the blue wall of silence, blue code, or blue shield, it must come down. We can no longer sit idly by and allow misconduct to occur without any penalty. And so this is what we will do. We will codify the duty to intervene, just like it's in many of the general orders of officers' departments now, but we're going to make it state statute because departments fail to enforce duty to intervene now. Supervisors can wait until a policy violation by the harming officer is confirmed. And sometimes, unfortunately, that takes months or years before ever launching an investigation into a failure to intervene. And then also you have some officers who will say that they weren't sure if a policy violation was occurring at that time. So to prevent that, we have this bill. And this proposed language requires intervention if another officer believes there may be a violation of policy or law, or to stop a person from being hurt, or if the force being used is no longer required. This standard is clear and it can be enforced. And so I stand with all of my fellow members of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus as we move forward to make positive change in Texas.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman Collier. Now we'll hear from Representative Jarvis Johnson explaining the use of force rules and how they're being narrowed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me first start off by thanking Chairwoman Thompson for her very strong leadership in this matter and all matters that she brings before this body with the extensive knowledge and experience that she has. I stand with all of my colleagues from the Texas Legislative Black Caucus as we stand united, because this is not an issue that is applicable to only one section of Texas, but all sections of Texas and all of the United States. It is beyond question that what happened to George Floyd was not necessary. This is not the first time that this has happened to unarmed Black men and women in this country, but we certainly want to make sure that it is the last. At some point or another, we have to start holding police officers accountable for their actions. But for police officers have been granted so much discretion that their attorneys will always say that they are defending or using a self-defense tactic in order to subdue any individual. Here in Texas, officers have recently claimed that a shooting death of an unarmed man was necessary because driving a car away from the officer was deemed a deadly weapon. Interaction at traffic stops can be turned deadly when officers escalate, and recent force of use on protesters, including the indiscriminate shooting of beanbag rounds into crowds, has resulted in the permanent disability of individuals guilty of no crime at all, including a high school student and a Texas State University student named Justin Howell. It is long past time for us to put statutory limits in the use of lethal force and more clearly set out expectations for all force used by police officers. In addition to the prohibition of a chokehold, this bill requires all force to be proportionate to the circumstances and seriousness of the offense. To address this problem of officers using force for minor offenses, which, when such actions result in the injury or death, seem deemed unjust. Force must be accompanied by attempted to de-escalate and use of warnings. Tactics that present a significant risk to bystanders should not be used. Lethal force, let me go back and say that one more time. Tactics that present significant risk to bystanders. That means shooting an unarmed individual as he's walking or running away in a crowd puts all citizens at risk, and we have to make sure that that stops. Lethal force shall not be used in the absence of imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Lethal force shall not be used in another lesser level of force that could work. And the use of lethal force the use of lethal levels of force terminate as soon as the threat is lessened. And in the case of Brother George Floyd, there was no threat. And yet, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the officer had his knee on his neck. There was no imminent danger, so therefore the force should have stopped. And so if it's these type of legislation that we will pass together in the House to ensure the safety of all citizens in this great state of Texas, but in particular, as we recognize the disproportionate number of shootings of unarmed individuals have been those of Black men. And so we are here standing in unity to protect all citizens, but in particular, the Black men who have been unjustly persecuted and targeted by police officers across the state of Texas and this nation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative Johnson. Now we'll hear from Chairman Coleman, who is going to talk about the non-jailable offenses, something he has been working on for quite some time. Chairman Coleman.
Thank you, Chair Dutton. First of all, I want to thank Chairwoman Thompson for putting this legislation together, and for my fellow Black Caucus members for putting all of their efforts into this. This is extremely important to all of us. To the Floyd family, you all lived in my district in the CUNY homes in George went to Yates, which is right down the street from my legislative district, and from where I live. So this is extremely important to all Texans and to me. The Sandra Bland Act that I passed in 2017 and addressed issues experienced by Sandra Bland, from the traffic stop to the lack of appropriate medical attention in the Waller County Jail. This bill picks up the last key item of reform and demonstrates that Texas takes action when a case reveals serious flaws in how we do things, like the use of force section of the new bill. The provisions limiting arrest and jail for fine-only violations are about the injustice of a wholly disproportionate response. George Floyd died over an alleged fake $20 bill. The fury we all feel is in part because his crime for which George Floyd died, if there ever was a crime that was minor, it was that. Video demonstration beyond a shadow of a doubt that Sandra Bland's initial detention occurred solely because officers can and do arrest even for infractions where jail is not an authorized punishable fine-only offense under current Texas law. These are called Atwater arrests, after Gail Atwater, who took the current Texas law all the way to the Supreme Court after being arrested for a seatbelt violation. This bill will finally limit an officer's ability to arrest on something like failure to signal, which is the reason that Sandra Bland was pulled over. Unnecessary Atwater arrests create unsafe conditions. In the Sandra Bland video, we see confirmed something we believe is a critical point in this debate. Drivers arrested when they have done nothing is something minor. Is something minor like the failure to signal are not happy about it. We're not happy about it either. We all are going to somewhere when we're pulled over. And an unexpected trip to jail is not something any of us feel is justified in the light of the nature of our original fine-only infraction. An officer may get more forceful to get someone to comply with what seems to be potentially or patently unreasonable requests to get out of the car and to be detained. This is exactly what happened to Sandra Bland. The exercise of this unreasonable authority escalates the situation. The officer's mad, the driver's mad, things go badly. Limiting arrest authority will reduce tensions at the traffic stops and save lives. And as Chairwoman Thompson knows, we both passed bills that deal with de-escalation policing. And anyone who escalates, or any officer that escalates the circumstance, puts the driver more at risk and the officer at risk. And this bill will solve those issues once and for all. Also in the bill are provisions to end pretext or Terry stops, which have been with us since the 1930s at least. Thank you, Representative Thompson, for putting this bill together. I look forward to working with you and all of my colleagues in the Texas Legislative Black Caucus to end these injustices once and for all.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Coleman. Now we'll hear from Representative Ron Reynolds, who will explain undercover officer testimony to us.
Thank you, Chairman Dutton, and I want to echo the sentiments that have already been given to Chairwoman Sophronia Thompson. Thank you for your leadership. We're at a watershed moment in our country, and we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Just like the death of Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi, it was the catalyst for the civil rights movement that led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The death of George Floyd is going to be the catalyst for modern criminal justice and policing reforms. And I want to thank the members of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus for speaking truth to power, for being on the right side of history to make sure that this never happens again. The provisions of the bill that I will be presenting will be dealing with the undercover officer testimony. This bill requires corroboration for undercover officer testimony, a long overdue reform. George Floyd personally experienced a conviction based on the potentially false allegations of a corrupt officer in Harris County, a problem we tried to address years ago, but could not get the most important provisions through the legislative process. George Floyd never received his notice from Harris County that he was among 160 people who may have been falsely convicted of drug cases based on the uncorroborated testimony of a corrupt Houston police officer, Gerald Goins. This is not the first time we've seen this problem. More than 2 decades ago, the Black population in the tiny town of Tula, Texas, was decimated by the arrest of dozens of simply baseless drug charges. The entire affair was grounded in the uncorroborated testimony of an undercover police officer, Tom Coleman, a man with a history of racial prejudice. The 1999 arrest of 46 people, 39 of them Black, resulted in 38 convictions for various drug charges and sentences up to 90 years in prison. Fortunately, for many of the accused, one person could prove conclusively her whereabouts on the day and time at issue. She had bank records. The cases fell apart. In early April 2003, a Dallas judge threw out all 38 drug convictions from Tulia because they were based on Coleman's questionable testimony. Shortly after that, the legislature tried to require corroboration from undercover officer testimony, but the last-minute police officers were excluded from the corroboration requirement, setting the stage for officers like Goins to replicate the corruption uncovered in the Tulia case. Among the many wrongs we right today, we repair the damage done when the Tulia bill passed without the provisions that would have prevented the Tulia incident itself and prevented the 160 Goins convictions. I stand in solidarity with my colleagues to make sure that during this next legislative session, that this is one of our top legislative priorities. And finally, just like Dr. Martin Luther King stated, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, we will certainly right the wrong that was caused by the unjustified death of George Floyd. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Representative Reynolds. Now we'll hear from the Senate sponsor of the bill, the Honorable Senator Royce West. Oh, we can't hear you. I think you're muted. We still can't hear you.
All right.
Now
Mr. Chairman.
Now we got you. Okay.
Members of the caucus, Representative Thompson, I also congratulate you for your leadership on this and look forward to working with you to make sure we pass this. To the Floyd family, thank you very much for allowing us to name this after George. And we look forward to making certain we get something done in the state of Texas that moves the needle on these particular issues. What has caused the protests and civil unrest that we've witnessed across Texas, the Dallas area, Austin, Houston, and other cities across the state, in places such as Portland, frankly centers around the fact that for the most part, nationally, officers who are responsible in the public eye for misconduct never appear in court or any serious actions ever taken against them. A few examples that come to mind are those that resulted in the deaths of Breonna Taylor. You're in bed. You're shot 8 times in bed, and no officer is held accountable for those actions. We continue to investigate it. When you think about Michael Brown, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, or 12-year-old Tamir Rice, where no one was held responsible for their loss of life. I don't know of anyone of any good conscience that can justify that loss of life. And yes, we recognize that we're going to have to get other organizations and other caucuses, Sombronia, in order to make certain that we pass this bill. We've got to make certain that police departments have the tools that will enable them not to have issues with the firing of an officer based on serious disciplinary issues. So we've got to make certain that we put in place a reasonable disciplinary matrix. And yes, we're going to need to make certain that we work with other groups in order to do that. We need to make certain that we have a matrix that, depending upon the infraction, that it's standardized and throughout the state of Texas is applied in a standardized manner. Under the language of the George Floyd Act, the disciplinary matrix cannot be overturned, overridden by meet and confer agreements. And yes, we are in many instances pro-labor. But the fact is that we need to have a matrix that's standardized and fit the specific circumstances of the discipline that is reasonable. And we recognize that that standardized approach should be based on an officer's infraction, the officer's prior conduct, their record, including, and those infractions should include removal, suspension, reassignment, demotion, deduction of points from promotional examination. And yes, those particular standards should be done in concert with the rank and file in police departments, the city councils, different civil rights groups, to make certain we come up with a set of standards that most reasonable people in this state can agree on. Is it going to be easy? No, we know it's not going to be easy. But all of us stand together to make these reasonable recommendations, and will invite our colleagues to be a part of it. Yes, they have a perspective. We will respect their perspective, but all of us know and understand that there's work to be done. And so, Sanfrondi, I look forward to working with you in the Senate to make certain that we pass this particular bill and get it on the governor's desk so that they can, in fact, the governor can, in fact, sign it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator West. And I think the program calls now for me to explain the difference between the Texas George Floyd Act, as we have called it, and the federal act. As most of you know, the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution says basically that the federal government gets to tell Texas what to do, but Texas doesn't get to tell the federal government what to do, and that's inherent in both of these bills. But I'll talk about just some of the highlights of it. The qualified immunity doctrine in the federal bill is what they're attempting to do is to limit the force and effect of the qualified immunity doctrine. In our bill, we essentially create a state cause of action for harm and essentially do away with, to a large extent, the qualified immunity doctrine, which has actually been a bar to almost bringing lawsuit against police officers for police misconduct. And I will mention that this was created, the qualified immunity doctrine was created by the courts and not by the legislature or not by the U.S. Congress. And so this is another case for a judicial activism that caused us to be in this hole we're in. The federal act also requires federal uniformed police officers to have body-worn cameras. We don't have that in our bill yet, but I will just say this, as I said at the start, that there are going to be several bills that will be separate and apart from this bill, which will address many of these actions. For example, in the body-worn camera area, I would hope that we would create a statute that would allow and permit that when an officer either negligently or intentionally turns off the body camera, that at least that can be said to a jury that had it been on, that would have been beneficial to the defendant, and allow the judges to even let juries hear that fact. There's a provision in the federal act also preventing chokeholds in our bill. That's also present. No-knock warrants, which has been at the forefront lately, particularly regarding Breonna Taylor and some of the causes in Houston. In our bill, we basically no-knock warrants and SWAT raids we will address in another bill, but it's my anticipation that we will basically do away with no-knock warrants, because I don't know why police officers even engage in that, because it puts them at risk almost as much as it does by the people who are sitting in the house at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning waiting for nobody in particular. But let's see, there's the deadly use of force. This is in the federal bill. It tries to at least look at it, and from a position of trying to de-escalate it. In the state bill, the one that we have, it requires de-escalation and proportionate use of deadly force. And it requires you to also de-escalate such that when the force is no longer present, there would be no imminent harm to either the public or the officer, that an officer had a duty to actually de-escalate the force. There's some other provisions in our bill. We essentially have now the Sandra Bland Act, which, again, I think you heard Chairman Coleman talk about in terms of eliminating arrestable offenses for, in certain cases. In the state and the federal bill, however, they don't really address that. Also in the federal bill, it attempts to restrict the transfer of certain military equipment to police. Now, we can't do that in our bill because that's not within the jurisdiction of the state, but I think it's important because one of the things we've seen happen is police officers and police forces have become more militarized in this last decade or so. There's a provision in our bill, as you heard Senator West talk about, in terms of discipline and the matrix for discipline, that is not in the federal bill. In our bill, we create a duty to intervene on behalf of officers, which says now we're going to help those good officers who say that, well, when people talked about officers, they always seem to suggest that all officers aren't bad. Well, this is for the officers who aren't bad. They need to intervene so that somehow or another they prevent one police officer from overstepping the bounds of the police officer. And lastly, there's no provision in the federal bill on a duty to identify. For us, that is extremely important because there's been lots of conversation in cases where police officers have not completely identified themselves. That's essentially what the major changes are, one bill to the next. And now I think we'll hear from Representative Tony Rose, who will talk about the community support and importance of voting. Thank you. Representative Rose.
Thank you, Chair Dutton. I would first like to thank Chair Thompson for her 47 years of continuous leadership in the pursuit of equality and justice in Texas. Thank you to the George family for joining my colleagues and I today. We remember the life and legacy of George Perry Floyd Jr. and work collectively to prevent additional unjustified deaths at the hands of law enforcement and to ensure measures are in place to prevent future tragic loss of life. The George Floyd Act will provide long overdue protections against a number of policing tactics that are unsafe for use with the public. I am proud to join Chair Thompson and my other colleagues of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus in introducing the George Floyd Act, ensuring wide sweeping reforms. However, the members of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus cannot pass the George Floyd Act on our own, and nor should we embark on this journey alone. Our colleagues in both chambers, both Republican and Democratic, from the precinct chairs to the executive branch, must all commit to justice, ourselves to justice, excuse me. I would like to thank those allies who have already decided to stand with us. I would like to thank the ACLU of Texas, Alliance for a New Justice System, Austin Justice Coalition, Black Lives Matter Houston, Community Resilience Trust, Just Liberty, Measure, the MELJ Center, Mothers Against Police Brutality, Texas Appleseed, Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, Texas Fair Defense Project, Texas NAACP, and the Texas Organizing Project. We welcome those of you committed to justice to join our ranks. If we, in good faith, can hold each other accountable, we will achieve sweeping changes in the state of Texas. We all know there will be those who will stand single-mindedly against this movement, but it's up to each of us, each citizen, to protect the rights with the power of our vote. Together, we can elect leadership dedicated to justice reform, whomever they may be. True change starts at the ballot box. It is critical that we come together and mobilize our friends, families, and neighbors to the polls. The power of change begins with your vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Representative Rose. Now we'll turn to Representative Alma Allen. Oh, there she is, okay. And she will talk about the other cases, lives lost to police brutality, and we'll have her go ahead and begin. Thank you, Representative Allen, for being here. Representative Allen, are you there? Hello?
She needs to unmute herself.
Can you unmute yourself? We can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Looks like she's frozen.
Okay. Well, let me do this. We'll come back to Representative Allen, but at this time, what I'd like to do is have the members of the caucus join me in welcoming again the George Floyd Foundation, who has taken out their time today to join us here, and they're represented by Ms. Teslan Figueroa. And I think I saw her on.
Can you hear now?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I can hear Representative Allen. Let's readjust again. Representative Allen, why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to say thank you, Representative Dutton. And I want to say I also stand in solidarity with the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, and a special thank you to the chairwoman, Sandra Thompson, for this grand legislation. We will support it. We want to take a moment to honor those who have fallen victim to police brutality, included but not limited to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Anatalia Jefferson, Sandra Bland, Botham Jean, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald. And those are just a few of the names. There are countless others who have lost their precious life. We want to know that they are gone, but they are not forgotten. And so we remember them today as we present this legislation. I'd like to take a moment of silence to honor those persons who have lost their lives and to pray for the families and communities who grieve with them. A moment of silence, please. And now I'd like to introduce to you Teslan Figueroa, Senior Advisor for the George Floyd Foundation. She will now give remarks regarding the mission of the George Floyd Foundation. Ms. Figueroa.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the Texas Legislative Black Caucus for all of your support. Getting really bad feedback.
Yeah, we're getting quite a bit of feedback. Ms. Figueroa, can you go ahead?
Let me try again. Is that better?
Still an echo.
Do you have your cell phone close?
Yeah. Two devices
Yeah, your
on.
cell phone close to your computer, Ms. Figueroa?
Is that better? My cell phone is off.
Cell phone close or what?
It's completely off. And not close to it.
Okay, try it now. Ms. Figueroa?
Okay, want to try again?
Yeah, you're okay now.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Nothing changed on my end, but that just goes to show that this movement is so powerful that there is always something trying to interfere. Those of us that are in social justice understand that we have to deal with outside interference, not just technical. So that is my reason for being here, to represent the George Floyd Foundation, to solidify how important it is to have support in the social justice movement. There are three things that the mission of the George Floyd Foundation is focused on. One of those is social justice education and advocacy. The second part is youth services, where the George Floyd Foundation will go into the community and provide scholarship support, college readiness, preparing young men and young ladies for various trade opportunities. A lot of the things that the Legislative Caucus has spoke to in regards to the criminal side of things, we also know that it is important that our youth have other options as well that can ensure that they are not involved in the criminal justice system. The third thing is workforce development. That is key. How do we reach out to working adults or returning citizens that have been incarcerated to have an opportunity to be re-implemented back into the community by having workforce opportunities as well as trade opportunities. We know that one of the things that George was focused on and working on was him being a truck driver. We know that trades allow individuals opportunities to have employment. And so that is also what the George Floyd Foundation will be working on. It is really important and key that everyone is aware that this is actually the first what you would call partnership with the George Floyd Foundation with the Texas George Floyd Act. Although the family has been extensively involved with the federal George Floyd Act with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson, this is indeed the first opportunity that the foundation has had since being formalized that they have had to work with Texas, one legislative body, and an actual bill that will be presented. So I know that is very key. And again, thank you, Ms. Thompson, for a special thank you to her leadership, not only in the caucus, but also reaching out to this family. All over the country, many things have been enacted on the state and city level. All over the country, people have painted murals and made T-shirts and started programs and even scholarships. But it has only been a few people that have actually reached out to this family to be involved. And so I want to give a special recognition to Representative Thompson for that, because although it is important and we encourage organizations to start, if you will, things that are inspired by George Floyd, we certainly do not want to not have those things happen. But it is also very important when the family has an opportunity to be involved and actually have a seat at the table, because after all, everything that we're doing is for a seat at the table. So thank you again to the Texas Legislative Black Caucus for having a seat at Texas table to not only support this act, but the many things that are done throughout the year. I am always a critic of politicians when I don't see things being done, but at the same time, I am the biggest cheerleader when I see that we are moving in the right direction. We all know that protest is nothing without policy. And so for those of us that are on the ground protesting, who are working hard to scream and yell, it is always comforting to know that our legislators are actually introducing policy to make that change. No, Attorney Crump will be speaking shortly after me, who is on the ground right now with Breonna Taylor's family. And so it feels good to know that our legislators are hearing what is on the ground, and most importantly, not hearing, but actually implementing what needs to be done. The George Floyd Foundation is here to support, not only just to be here to applaud what you guys are doing, but to be involved and to educate. And we want to be a part of any advocacy that you see fit, that makes sense for the mission of the foundation and the mission of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, because this is certainly not a fly-by-night foundation. It is not a foundation that is just made just because it is one that is truly standing on a mission and a vision to ensure that George Floyd did not die in vain.
Okay, now.
Figueroa, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. It is my real pleasure today to introduce Attorney Ben Crump. I am giving you the very, very short version of his resume. Through a steadfast dedication to justice and service, renowned civil rights and personal injury attorney Benjamin Crump has established himself as one of the nation's profound lawyers and advocates for social justice. He has worked on some of the highest profiles in the United States, representing the families of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Stephon Clark, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, as well as the residents of Flint, Michigan, where they were affected by the poison waters of the Flint. He has been nationally recognized as the 2014 NNPA Newsmaker of the Year, the National Trial Lawyers Top 100 Lawyers, and Ebony Magazine Powerful 100 Most Influential African Americans. In 2016, he was designated as an honorary fellow by the University of Pennsylvania College of Law. His book, published in October of 2019, Open Season, Legalized Genocide on Colored People, reflects on the landmark cases he has battled and how discrimination in the courthouse devastates real families and communities. He is the founder and principal owner of Ben Crump Law. It is my real pleasure to introduce to you Attorney Ben Crump. Mr. Crump.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and to the Texas State Black legislators. I am so very grateful to be with you. I am in Louisville, Kentucky's airport today because we had to go to court on Breonna Taylor's matter. And so the George Floyd Act is important, so important, not only in your state, but the implications have far-reaching impact on other injustices around America. I see my fraternity brother, my mentor and great leader, Royce West, and so I say greetings to him as well, and the other great leaders in the state of Texas who thought it not robbery to introduce this important legislation. Because I'm in an airport, I will keep my comments very brief. I thank Tez, Figueroa, and George Floyd family for being instrumental in partnering with the state Black legislators to make sure they have a face for this legislation. Oftentimes, we have to have the emotional connection to get people to act. I know that as a trial lawyer, you have to have people feel connected to do something. And my God, your homeboy from Houston, Texas, the 3rd Ward, he has connected with people not just across America, but across the world in a way that I have never seen in my life. And so I will say these brief words before I introduce you to his brother, Rodney Floyd, and I don't know if his brother Phalonis is on as well, and his cousins, Sharita Reed and Tara Brown, who I think are all assembled there. I will just say, as you move forward with this legislation, remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "The coward asked the question, is it safe? And then he said, expediency asked the question, is it politically correct? And then he said, Madam Chairwoman, vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? But then he said, Senator West, conscience comes along and asks the question, is it right? And Dr. King concluded, there comes a time when one must take a position that's neither popular nor politically correct or not even safe. But Dr. King said there comes a time when one must take a position because their conscience tells them it is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do to stand up for our community. It is the right thing to do to speak up for our community. It is the right thing to do to fight for our community. Because if we don't fight for our community, we can't expect anybody else to fight for our community. And in introducing the George Floyd Act, it gives us documented evidence that you all at the Texas State Black legislators are fighting for our community. And I can never, ever say thank you enough on behalf of the George Floyd family. But I am absolutely certain that his family can thank you in a way that neither Miss Figueroa could ever do. And so I would like to introduce you to George's baby brother, a young man who has found his voice and continues to try to make sure that the world know, until we get justice for George Floyd, that none of us can breathe. I ask for the charity of your undivided attention for Mr. Rodney Floyd. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
How y'all doing today?
Good.
All right, Rodney Floyd, George's youngest brother. And I would like to thank the Texas Legislative Black Caucus for introducing the George Floyd Act. And it means so much to us all, cousins, sisters, brothers. And it means so much for us as Black people. And this act has so many great things that's way overdue, way overdue. We all know we can go speak to history, we just say 300, 400 years overdue to us and much needed. And I'm getting a little worked up, guys. I'm sorry. Because I met Ms. Thompson a while back. I'd like to thank her as well for being on the front line and all of you guys as well. And she told us so many key things and expressed so much support. And it's been wonderful on her end. And going to my brother George, and I wish you guys could have met him. I know a couple of you probably read about his sports history, but as a family man, as a brother, father, uncle, cousin, he was a great man. Mm-hmm. And it's sad that the picture they're trying to paint my brother as, and about his past, and one thing we got to keep in head, don't let them take the focus off. Before you knew his past, you knew George Floyd as a man. And except they didn't see him as a man, they saw him as 2/5 or whatever they saw him as. But he wasn't a man then, he wasn't their equal. And the George Floyd Act, hopefully, is get passed. And, we get the equal justice, equality that we all need across the board. And then some. But George, as a man, he was a great man. If he can hear that his death wasn't in vain, and he's going to see it, because he's going to hear the roar from the people of Earth, everybody, all of us. And I know he's going to be smiling and cheering that on. And and Floyd's a great hugger. He will hug everybody. Yeah. just to see the unity this has brought, and the smiles on faces. And Floyd was a loving man. He wants equality of everybody. If y'all could have met him, honestly. And as a family speaking brother right now, I love you guys. Thank you for the support. Our local councilmen and women, I met a couple of you guys before. Thank you for everything. And thank y'all.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Chairwoman Nicole Collier, I know it's your turn up, but before you do that, let me take a point of personal privilege and recognize some of the other legislators who are on here, who people have not heard from, and that's Representative Barbara Gergen, Representative Carl Sherman, Representative Lorraine Birabal, Representative Joe Desatel, Representative Retta Bowers, and Representative Cheryl Cole. Thank you all for joining us today. Representative Collier.
Thank you so much, Chair Dutton. We have heard so much information, and we know that you guys have questions. And so if you'd like to ask a question, if you're a member of the press and you'd like to ask a question, please push the button on your control panel to raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you. I want to make sure that you guys, this is such an important task and information that we're sharing, and the legislation that we're pushing, that I'm so grateful. You recognize the Texas Legislative Black Caucus members that are on here today, but we also have members of the legislature, the Texas legislature, who are not members of the caucus that are participating and joining in, because this is an important issue. And so I want to thank those members of the Texas House who took the time to join in to the conference call today for this press conference. We appreciate your willingness to hear from us and the issues that are very important to our caucus as we move forward. We also want to acknowledge that this is not the time to stop. We have this legislation, and like all legislation, we need your support. So we start today with rolling out this legislation and then the countless others that we're going to file. But we need to hear from you. We'd like you to stand with us by supporting these bills that we're pressing and pushing in terms of making a change in Texas, whether it's criminal justice, healthcare, education, whatever it is, we need your support. So you can follow along by following our Facebook page and also by contacting your state representative to show your support for this legislation and those that we bring forth. So at this time, I'm going to take some questions from members of the media, and I got to just make sure I got my media list here. I've got 3 hands right. So John Moritz, we'll take a question from John Moritz.
Well, thank you very much, and appreciate y'all having this news conference. Y'all talked about building coalitions and some of the groups that have already come aboard on this legislation, but there's other forces in play, particularly
John, we cannot hear you. You're going in and out. I'm sorry, John.
I'm being your way. The police unions, are you still not hearing me?
No, okay, now we can hear you.
Okay. We got the police union and the tort reform groups that may or may not be on board. Are you going to bring them on board, or are you going to try to steamroll them to it?
So, John, what I think you're asking is if we have opposition from various groups, how are we going to respond to that? I will allow Chair Thompson to respond.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Moritz. It is my intention to try to work with all the groups that are impacted by this legislation, whether they are for it or against it, so that we can have a consensus on coming together to pass meaningful legislation. I believe in the last several months, or weeks, I should say, that the public itself has spoken very loudly and very clearly that there should be some changes and there needs to be some changes. And I think that the organizations who are presently may be in opposition to this know and aware of those feelings and the sentiments of the public. And everything at some point in time needs some fine tuning. And I'm hopeful that they would, rather than sit on the sidelines, that they will come to the table and work with us, and we can hammer out a piece of legislation that would be beneficial to society as a whole.
Thank you.
Cole, can I respond to that also?
Yes, sir.
I concur with Chairwoman Thompson. We recognize that all of the groups, John, that you just mentioned, have lobbyists at the Capitol and also have capital in terms of political capital at the Capitol. And so we're going to need to make sure we bring them to the table and come up with some legislation, and hope that, as in the past, that they will in many instances, act with good faith and recognize, as the chairwoman just said, that it's time in this country to do something about these particular issues, and that we come together and we get it done. We don't have to wait until next year. Hopefully, we'll begin doing that as soon as next week.
Thank you so much. Now we'll hear a question from Willie G.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, my name is Willie G. You can call me Willie G. It's actually Glasgow, but I always tell everyone to call me Willie G for short. I'm with the North Forest News. I do the media and in the community. And question that I had was, how soon can this go public? Is this something that we can put out there now to let people know about this, or is there a certain time frame that you want this to be public?
Well, now is the time. This is what we ask that you help support and bring awareness to what the work that we're doing here. Chair Thompson has made it very well known that we are not going to take the same old, same old, same old, same old. So we have put forth this legislation that she's carrying in the House. So definitely spread the word, let everyone know that a change is coming. There's going to be a new day in Texas.
Okay, I have another question. Congratulations, of course, on your anniversary for the Black Caucus. I think it's like 40-something years. Definitely what I would like to do for your anniversary is to put together a piece, a collage, to where we can showcase all of the members of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus and attach this bill to it to let people know that State Representative Sophia Thompson is spearheading this bill. And thank you very much, State Representative Thompson, for this. And to make this known and to put it out there so that everybody can know, and to also announce the people, the organizations that have joined forces with you also to bring more awareness to it.
Okay, thank you so much. We definitely will be happy to speak with you to get that information. So if you can contact us offline, and we'll be happy to work with you. We're going to go to our next question, Mia Shea.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, lawmakers. Is the Floyd family still on? Are the Floyd family members still on?
Yes, they're still on.
Okay. If they're still on, I would like to talk, to have either Rodney or one of his sisters speak out about, there's, the legislation is fairly extensive. I was wondering for them, if they had to prioritize, are there any aspects of the George Floyd Act that are really, really important, that's really impacted them and what they've seen on a regular basis? And then if they can answer that, and maybe if they can't, maybe Ms. Figueroa can, just talk about like what aspects of it are really important and why it stands out to them. And I would love to hear from either Chair Dutton or Chair Coleman about how you've all been in the legislature for a long time, and how still fighting the fight about trying to make these systematic changes. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Ms. Figueroa to answer the question that's directed to the Floyd family. There's pending litigation, and they're not represented by counsel right now, so because he had to get off. So I'm going to ask Ms. Figueroa to answer that question. Great question, but I'm going to direct it to her, and then I will ask Chair Coleman and Dutton to respond to your next question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for acknowledging that. I appreciate it. I'm available to answer questions because you are absolutely right due to pending litigation. it is best that either myself or Attorney Crump, and just for the media listening, Attorney Crump did have to jump on a plane, so he is not available. So I certainly can answer any questions that you have from the family perspective, and or obviously you can defer to the legislators here that we have. But to answer your question, I think that the main thing that is important to this family are the pieces that have already been eloquently pointed out. We know that qualified immunity is very important, not just to the George Floyd family. Obviously, this George Floyd case will be in Minnesota, but when we talk about change and how we need to affect change moving forward, I know that is extremely important, in particularly a case that Attorney Crump worked on here as well, that I know all of you are aware of, the Robbie Tolan case. Was also a case that was a good example of how important qualified immunity is. So that is very important to this family. Obviously, the duty to render aid is also a key point in this legislation that we know is important because of what everyone, the world, had a chance to see for 8 minutes and 40 seconds where officers did not render aid. Another key point that is important to the family, the foundation, and as well as Attorney Crump is the use of force narrowed. I know the bill focuses on that, and we also were able to see that. I think what made this, I know that what has made this case stand out among the others is because we've always had, we've had video in a lot of cases recently. I've worked with Attorney Crump for the last several years. He's represented over 200 families in police brutality. But what made this case, I believe, very different to the world is it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Oftentimes you see a police officer shoot and they're able to say, you know, it was a quick reaction. I didn't know what I should do. We also know that stand your ground is also an issue that we have always worked on to say, did they fear for their life? What made this case unique is the world had an opportunity to see almost 9 minutes of a deliberate choice where the duty to render aid was not even an option, the inability to recognize him as a human being, the fact that George Floyd, you can even see what tapes that have been recently released as well, had issues breathing prior to having a knee on his neck. So the world was able to see that the officers had an opportunity to do something different for a total of 9 minutes, and they did not. And that is what has truly woken up the world. So this legislation, to answer your question, I think the key points is duty to render aid, use of force being narrowed, and obviously prohibiting chokeholds. Although George Floyd was not in a chokehold, a knee was still on his neck. And through the George Floyd, this incident, we have already seen states take action. We saw that with Sylvester, the Mayor Turner, do immediate action on prohibiting chokeholds in the city of Houston. We've also seen it in New York and Colorado. So this is another example how on the state and local level, change can be implemented right now, opposed to having to go through the federal process. So those are the key areas that the family certainly that drew their attention. But I think the legislation as a whole is something that we certainly support.
Chair Coleman, did you want to say anything, or Chair Dutton, in response to the second question?
I forgot.
Well, thanks. Good. Go ahead, Terrell. Go ahead.
I was going to ask her, what was the question again?
It dealt with the times, you know, how do you think this is going to be different than the past as what you've seen in going forward?
You know, again, I send my condolences to the Floyd family, but I think one of the things George Floyd has done is I think he's opened the door to the conscience of people all around the world. Because what we're facing now, I don't think we were ever faced before. And this caucus, while we have been at the forefront for many, 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 many years, trying to perfect some change in some of these areas that are now come to the forefront, it is now, when we talked about it before, sometimes people didn't really get the message, but now they have seen it. Now they have seen it, and what they saw, I think, touched their conscience, and I think the legislature also is not exempt from that. And so I suspect that while we've had difficulty in the past of getting things done through by the police union, as you know, and by some of the other members of the legislature who always thought that anything we did was being soft on crime, for example. Now what we do is I think we have a chance, based on the fact that they now have seen this happen. They've seen it with their own eyes. I think we stand on fertile ground, better ground now than we ever have before.
So, Maya, thanks for the question. Clearly, even the act against George Floyd has not stopped violence against individuals. Let's just take into consideration what happened overlapping Williamson County and Travis County, and the death of the gentleman who was turned on his face, his knee in the back, and died of congestive heart failure. And so with many other deaths, clearly we have to change and make sure that in Texas, that undue force is not used. We tried to put many things into the Sandra Bland Act, and we weren't able to get them passed. With the death of George Floyd and the fact that the world has reached out to the family and to the people who are trying to get him justice and people like him justice, it's imperative that his home state pass things beyond what we were able to do in the Sandra Bland Act that prevent other circumstances like this. And no one should ever stop till we get everything that is needed in order to prevent violence against people in a traffic stop, in their apartment, in their home, in their business, that is undue, and deaths that happen that should never have happened. And so that's the purpose of this act, is to go forward and make sure that those things that each member of this caucus has brought up are passed, because those are issues or items or policies that prevent death in a traffic stop, in someone's home, in their business, in any case. And quite frankly, this is an important time, because with all of the interest in what happened to Mr. Floyd, if we can't do it now, then when will we do it? And that's why this effort by the Texas Legislative Black Caucus is so important, because we're not going to stop with just having a protest in outrage. This has to go through and present and pass policy that protects Americans in Texas, but particularly Black Americans and Black Texans and other Texans of color.
Just let me add this also. This represents a great opportunity for the governor, who has expressed concern about what happened to George Floyd, to take a look at what we are recommending and join us in pulling together the necessary caucuses as well as interest groups to look at this and come up with some additional recommendations and figure out exactly how we pass this. It'd be a great signal if he made this an emergency item, and that we pass this within the first 90 days of the legislative session.
Amen.
Oh, and by the way, we were able to get, even though there's some controversy about implicit bias training, TCOL is going to put in place. It was in the Sandra Bland Act with statutory language, but was removed. So we have one victory at the state level, that we were able to get TCOL to start implicit bias training without statute. So I think that's at least a good start for all of us in terms of having action being taken without statute.
Chairwoman Nicole, this is Representative Gervin Hawkins, and one of the things I'd like to say, and no doubt thank you to our Chairwoman Thompson, but what this piece of legislation also does and talks to is the disciplinary matrix. That's so critical to this in terms of accountability. So when the other press person talked about how will we get our allies on, how will we get other groups, I think we all can agree as human beings that accountability is important, and particularly in a profession when you can take one's life. Accountability is key. And so that discipline matrix needs to be detailed. It need not to be overturned by unions, and it need to make sure that it covers the areas that have been mentioned here today. So I'm excited about this piece of legislation. I think Ms. G need to realize we need her media format to keep pushing for people to get out and press their reps, their senators, to make sure that this wonderful piece of legislation become a reality. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Absolutely, Representative Gervin Hawkins. Thank you so much. Okay, we're really short on time, so I'm going to take one more question. I see Cassie Pollock has a question. So Cassie, let's hear from you. Let's hear your question.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This question's for Chairwoman Thompson and Senator Royce West. Just wanted to see if either one of you have spoken with the governor or the governor's office on this bill to see, whether there's going to be any buy-in from Abbott on the front end, just in terms of supporting this bill as it makes its way through the legislature next session.
I have not had that privilege yet. I'm looking forward to that opportunity, and I'm hoping that that opportunity presents itself.
I'm not spoken to the governor about this legislation, but last week when he was in Dallas, I spoke with him about this particular area, i.e. the George Floyd related criminal justice issues, and he still is in fact committed to do something in this particular area. Hopefully he will partner with us on this legislation.
Thank you so much to you both.
Great. So that was shorter than I thought. So let's just take one last question from Jeff Rauner. So Jeff, let's hear from you.
Hi, this is Jeff Rauner from Reform Austin. Regarding the disciplinary matrix, does the bill lay out a matrix or does it lay a path to creating one further on?
It lays out a path to create one at the state level and also at the local level.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's all the time we have for questions. So much. Thank you guys so much for participating. I encourage you to reach out to your state representative, your state senator, to let them know your position and your feelings about this issue and how it impacts our future, and as well as visiting the Texas Legislative Black Caucus Facebook page and our website, txlbc.org. And now I'll turn it over to Chair Dutton to close us out.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Let me thank all of you for being a part of this today. I think it's been groundbreaking, and I think now we know we've got a lot of work to do. This caucus is committed to doing that work, and I want to thank all of the people on here, particularly the people, the public who was listening, and ask them to join us. And I want to emphasize something that Senator West said. I've not talked to the governor about this bill either, but I think in the interest of getting this bill in the right environment that it ought to be, the governor has to put it on the emergency call so that we have an opportunity to debate this bill during the first part of the session. I don't know that since I've been there, I don't know that there's been any more important emergency work to be done than the work to clean this up. I want to respond to the fact that we recognize that there's opposition. There's going to be opposition to the bill. Some of the opposition is simply because this is the Legislative Black Caucus and they've been our opposition from day one. But that's never stopped any one of us in this caucus from doing what we think was right. And when we think we're right, we might have to stand alone, but we'll do it. And we're going to make Texas, as I said at the start, a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And we're going to make sure that's done for all people, particularly all Black people and all brown people. And so with that, the work starts now. So for all of the people listening, call your state representative, talk to them about it. This is not the last say on this bill, though, because there are going to be other parts of it that we're going to have to do to make sure that we cover the full ground of criminal justice in this state, because it just doesn't, it begins with the police. Because as I've said last night, one of the things that occurred to me is that when we have now seen all of these people who have been serving time innocently and people who have been arrested innocently, it all begins because the police arrested the wrong people. And somehow or another, that didn't get over very well. But we're going to change all of that. We're going to, like I said, make those changes that need to be made. And we're going to do it, and we're going to make police better. Policing in this state better. And I think the people who are policemen are going to join us eventually and say, yes, that's what we ought to do. And so God bless you all. Be safe. And thank you again.
So long.
And with that, we'll say, see you later. Okay, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Let me welcome you to the Texas Legislative Black Caucus Town Hall meeting on public education. I am Harold Dutton. I'm chairman of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, and we are 15 members in the Texas House of Representatives and 2 senators. We are celebrating 48 years of legislative achievements. We have several members joining us tonight, as well as several guests whom you will hear from later in the programs. Tonight's topic is only about public education, and not only the educating our children, but the safety of our children.